The Sumatran rhino teeters on the brink of extinction. With a projected estimate of less than 80 individuals in the wild, experts are divided on just how many remain and where. With conflicting and sometimes misleading data on their whereabouts, it is exceedingly difficult to track them down and therefore protect them. While captive breeding efforts largely remain the last hope for their survival, experts contemplate how many exist in viable populations, if at all, and even more importantly, how to direct funding to keep this incredibly rare and unique species alive. My name is Mike DiGirolamo, your host for Mongabay Explores, a special podcast series from Mongabay.com's global team, where I speak with experts from the field working to protect the critically threatened forests and animals of Sumatra. Join me bi-weekly as I dive into the unique beauty and key issues of this one-of-a-kind landscape and the people working to protect it. This week, I caught up with returning guest Wulan Pusparini, former species conservation specialist at the Wildlife Conservation Society, and currently a Ph.D. student in environmental conservation at Oxford University. In addition to our last conversation, Wulan touched upon two large questions about the Sumatran rhino that are difficult to answer. Where are they, and what can be done to save them? Questions remain about their population, particularly in Way Kambas National Park, which has estimates as high as 33 individuals or as low as 12. The other location of Bukit Barisan Selatan National Park is another story. Some experts believe there may be only a handful or perhaps none left, as not a single camera trap or patrol sighting has occurred since 2015. Wulan made note of not only the importance of captive breeding efforts, but also the importance of keeping rhino protection units trained with the most up-to-date monitoring practices. And while a government census to count the population is expected to be completed by the end of the year, the threats they face continue to persist. It is no secret that the Sumatran rhino is in a precarious position, but it bears repeating how dependent they are on specific locations in Sumatra to survive, and the fact that they are an entire genus in and of themselves.
So among all of the extant species of rhinos, Sumatran rhinos is one of the more primordial, I guess, if you're talking from like their lineage. They're more ancient compared to the other species, and the fact that you can only find them in Indonesia and it's very small populations and scattered, and if you lose them, like you lose the whole genus.
Wulan goes on to mention, our response to saving this extremely endangered animal raises questions about our ability to respond to saving others.
And they're like one of the big mammals that extinct in our lifetime, like right in front of our eyes. And if we cannot save this species, like how are we going to save the other large mammals that we still have?
Wulan has a long history of working to protect the Sumatran rhino. While the species has been endangered for some time, the dwindling sightings are a new development, where now we go years without seeing one. 15 years ago, you could detect hard evidence that one was close by within a single day of trying.
So I start my work with rhino with my undergraduate thesis, actually, back in 2004 in the Bukit Selatan National Park. So I'm working with WCS camera trap and also with the Rhino Protection Unit Ranger Patrols data. So the whole idea is to combine those data and come up with the first assessment of like where the rhinos are and kind of like rough estimate of how many there are left. And that's quite a special period in my lifetime. I mean, like that's the first time I went to the field. And back in the 2005, you can actually walk inside the Bukit Selatan National Park and walk less than 1 day, and you can find the footprints of the rhinos and also the wallows, and there are like so many within those. There's like crossroads in the south part of the park, and just like 100 meters from that crossroad, you can find like a lot of signs of these rhinos.
One of those rhinos was Rosa, who now resides at the SRS captive breeding facility inside Way Kambas National Park, and experts believe she may have been one of the last rhinos of Bukit Barisan Selatan, which, around the time she was relocated, was estimated to be around 60 to 80 rhinos just within that park. Today, there may be none.
And actually in 2005 is the time when they find the rhinos called Rosa. So it's a female rhinos, and they just found her like very tame and going outside of the forest. And that's the time when they kind of like capture her and habituated and move her to Way Kambas National Park. So it's quite amazing from that time in 2004, 2005 just by walking around that crossroad, you can find like a lot of signs of rhinos, tigers, and elephant in the same area. And I'm continue working in that area with the RPUs until 2009.
It was around this time that Wulan says she noticed a sharp decline in evidence of or sightings of Sumatran rhinos, which she attributes to the completion of a paved road running through the park.
And at that time, in 2007 or 2008, that crossroad, which originally is like a dirt road, they start to pave the road, make it larger and like smoother. And you can actually use your car inside and can reach to like maximum of like 60 or 70 kilometers per hour. And that area has become very popular to cross from the Lampung province to the Bengkulu province, because it's much faster. And you can see just from the sign of the rhinos, not only rhinos and elephants, you can see quite drastically decrease of their signs, their number of signs. And in 2012 is the last time I worked there with WCS at that time, before I went for my master's study. And we don't see that sign anymore. It's really, really drastic in just less than 10 years. And when I come back from my study in 2014, 2015, that's the last time we found like signs of rhinos in a camera trap. And we don't see any confirmation signs of rhino anymore. So you can imagine, just like in less than 9 years, in less than a decade, you see a drastic decline of this species. And it's really making an impact for me as a conservationist, because this is like the first species that I work on. And I actually see the decline and their possibly extinction in this one park. So it's like quite sad.
Experts struggle to pinpoint population numbers in both the major national parks mentioned. Wulan says that the division in opinion isn't for lack of effort. One particular hurdle is the examination of evidence. In one instance, gathering of stool samples, nearly 60% of the samples gathered were found not to be that of rhinos, but that of tapirs.
It's crazy, isn't it? This game of numbers. Everybody keep like, oh, it's 10, no, it's 50, no, it's 15. It's like, is that even matters? Like, well, in Way Kambas, I cannot say for rhinos, but we have a study for elephants there. And elephant is big. I mean, like they walk in herd for like 40 elephants. And we found a lot of like dead elephants around the park and inside the park. And we conduct a study as well, like fecal DNA, which the team actually need to go inside the forest, like, and walk in like very tight transect line to find this fecal DNA. We couldn't find that as many as rhino signs compared to like 2005, 2004 again. Back in 2008, actually, when I'm doing studies there, we actually, like my team and I, we actually found like very fresh wallow of rhinos, and we can still, the rhinos like gone, like walking away, and we can still see the footprint like very fresh in the mud. Like that's the closest encounter I have with rhinos. But that was 2008. And just for like, I don't know, like 5 years, you don't see that many signs anymore. And what also kind of scary, Way Kambas is like very small park, and it has very hard edges, like it's surrounded by village. And it's very flat, unlike the Gunung Lusur or Bukit Barisan Selatan, where you actually need to like climb up all of these hills. And Way Kambas is very flat. You can just walk inside the park and actually get to like the center of the park, where you still have like tigers there and like most of the elephants as well. So it's not hard to making a guess, like if the elephants are not faring better, like, how can we say about the rhinos?
Even considering the uncertainty around the population in Way Kambas, it is still believed to be one of the last strongholds of the species. However, like Bukit Barisan, the evidence of their presence is diminishing.
The area is very, very small. And if you go to the center of the park at that time, you can still find like signs of rhinos. It's giving you impression that there's a lot of rhinos there. Well, probably there's a few of them, but you see like their signs multiple times. But at least that's what we know happened back in 2008, 2010. But I don't think the same situations is happening now. I think like from private conversations with my colleagues, we see like the same trends happening in Way Kambas. You kind of like just you don't find their signs anymore. And if you learn from what happening in Sabah, you find a lot of like rhino signs, right? But when you actually capture the rhino, it's come from like one single rhinos. They can walk like quite a lot like in single days.
Way Kambas has expanded their SRS captive breeding facility recently to accommodate 3 new rhinos, but Wulan says that finding just one in the wild will be hard enough.
So I don't know the significance of 3. I guess like it's to match with the number of breeding pair that we already have in SRS. But just to get like one wild rhino is hard enough. Even if like we can find 1 or 2 like breeding age rhino, it will be like a great boost for the conservation of these rhinos in SRS.
One argument as to why it's so hard to find them has been attributed to behavioral changes, spurred on by environmental degradation, where once they'd roam freely without fear, now they may avoid. So I asked Wulan to weigh in on this.
Well, a lot of mammals actually undergo like behavioral change. There's a lot of study, like if you put a camera trap, you find like the activity pattern of these animals are changing. Like they activity times are not like diurnal or like nocturnal anymore, but actually like ephemeral. There's a lot of study on that, but like using that argument to saying that that's why we don't detect rhinos in the camera traps, I think it's quite far-fetched, right? Because we're not only using camera trap for trying to detect this rhino, we're also collecting the fecal DNA. Like by saying we, I mean like the whole rhino conservation is not me personally. But we're also using fecal DNA, which like the animal can avoid us as much as they can. But if we find the fecal DNA, we can always collect that. And you don't find it. I mean, like there's always like negative result. Like with all of those fecal DNA, most of them are like false positive. Like what we talk about, like what we talk about in the article 2017 with Jeremy, it still hold. And if you base your founding with the like footprints, the rhino's footprints and the tapir footprints, very, very similar. If you're not used to like differentiate between them, you cannot do it easily. Like back in 2004, there's still quite a lot of rhino footprints, and you can, okay, so this is rhino and this is tapir. You can see the difference. But like now, like the RPUs are like also like a new generation of RPUs, like the old generation of RPU that used to go to the forest with me are already retired now. When this new generation of RPU going into the forest and they try to find rhino footprints, they only find like tapir footprints, and they don't have rhino footprints to make it, to see the difference between it. It's quite hard to do, like unless you can find the DNA in the footprints and analyze it. And okay, it's rhino. I wouldn't bet my money on that, like saying like there's still like 50 rhinos in the BBS just because of the footprints, or even Way Kambas, right? Those 2 places have high possibility of false positive because of the tapir. So the only way, if you want to prove that there's rhino there, either by positive confirmation from the camera, from the picture, or from DNA, unless you can provide those 2 proof to the conservation community, I think it's quite wistful thinking, or like wasteful of like strategy of conservation to trying to just proving this population still like ecological viable in these 2 national parks.
Wulan also addressed the notion that the rhinos may be avoiding the camera traps, retreating further into the hills of Bukit Barisan.
That's also funny because we put camera traps in hills as well. I mean, like when you put a camera, you're looking at the map and you're trying to figure out like where the animals walk, right? Like a lot of the places that animal walks is not always the hill. Sometimes in the crossroad of this animal trail, and sometimes like near the river. So we target all of these places. We try to increase our probability to detecting these mammals, either it's like tigers or rhinos. So if we're already doing that, and if we only like cover the area with like 20 cameras, okay, we might miss something. But this is a study that's been repeated a lot of times. Like we do camera traps at least for a tiger for every 3 years in a great size with camera distance like between 2 and 3 kilometers. And we're not only targeting, like down here or here. There's no differentiating on that. So we target all of the area that the animals might cross, which including rhinos. And there's still no pictures of rhinos. So I don't know. Like, do you want to cover like the entire area with camera trap, like every like 1 kilometers? Like, you still cannot do that. It's impossible.
So the question now is, are there rhinos in Bukit Barisan Selatan or not? However, Wulan says the real question is, if there are rhinos there, how can you effectively direct funding to protect them? Otherwise, the debate, she feels, doesn't go anywhere.
Look, first of all, I don't think the difference between the belief of whether there is a rhino in BBS or there is not really useful, right? Well, I believe there's no rhinos left in BBS, but I would like to be proven that I'm wrong. So I think the better discussions need to be, okay, if you believe that rhinos still exists in BBS, what could we do to, make it better? There's a lot of like road crossing the national park in BBS. We see that this road like having a negative impact of these rhinos and elephant and tigers. Do we do anything on that? We don't even have like a checkpoint in this road or have like quota for the car passing the road. We don't do anything to addressing the threats of this rhino population. But instead of like we spending our money to putting like more cameras, just trying to prove to like a lot of people that we still have the rhinos in BBS. But that's not really the point. I mean, like, don't spend a lot of money just to prove that the rhino is still there. There's a lot of study going on in Bukit Barisan Selatan, not only for rhinos, but also for tigers. And that's proving the same thing. Like, if you don't find the rhinos in the tiger survey, which using the same approach and the same method and the same like kind of like camera trap kind of placement, you don't find any rhinos there. I mean, like, just work on that and spend the limited conservation resource to something that more beneficial if you still believe the rhino is still there.
She had some suggestions on where one could start directing funds, namely into the rhino protection units.
What upgrading the RPU? That's one thing. Yeah, and I think it's already happening as well. Like, it's not fair to say that they're doing not a good job, but like there's a lot of increasement in the patrol effort compared to like 10 years ago when I was still working for RPUs. They have like more systematic database and all of that. So I think like use that. Base your decisions on that, not just by like wistful thinking or like impossible belief that rhino is still there. Just like working on the system of the conservations and protections that you have.
She added that the debate surrounding a viable population in BBS is perhaps too little too late, and that the attention is now shifting towards Way Kambas, and that rhinos there now face a similar urgent crisis.
So this whole thing is about the rhinos, like the possibility that rhinos is already extinct in Bukit Barisan Selatan. It's happening like it's 4 years ago, and it's quite surprising if they still talk about it like now. Like, I think like a lot of people finally accepting that, well, okay, the BBS rhinos probably is not there anymore. And I think the discussions now is in Way Kambas, right? So a lot of people are now like talking, or probably the Way Kambas rhinos are also like following the same trend. So I think that the talking about the BBS rhino is all like a lot of like overdue. Like, it should be like happening a lot of many years ago, and now like you just like how to deal with the aftermath.
And yet, where a viable population may still exist is on the minds of many experts. But Wulan says if she knew where there was one, she wouldn't make that information public, because to do so would leave them vulnerable to those that seek to poach them for their horns.
If I know like where they are, if I'm like a really powerful psychic and I can like just use my mind and know where the rhinos are, I wouldn't tell anyone. I wouldn't tell you. I want them to keep hiding. I think that's the best way to conserve them. That's not the answer that you want.
However, Wulan does acknowledge the importance of captive breeding, and she isn't arguing against this, but rather that we need to focus our efforts on search and rescue operations on where we know that rhinos do exist, in Borneo and Way Kambas. As for viable populations that may or may not exist in other areas, she believes the best thing to do is to not tell anyone and to let them be.
We know where they are. Even like the rhinos in the Borneo, that's being said like, oh, it's a new discovery. No, it's not a new discovery. Like people know they're there, but we just don't want to say it in the media, like just keep it there. But it's not possible anymore when the number is like very, very low. So we know that there's rhinos in Way Kambas at least back in 2008 or 2010. We know there's still rhinos in BBS back in 2014 at least. For all of these populations that are like very, very low or even it's gone, like the one in Borneo and the one in Way Kambas, I believe like the only way you can save them is search and rescue, search them in the wild and bring them to captivity. But for other populations, like in the bigger local landscape where we believe that we can save them in the wild, just let them be. Like at first, even if like we know where they are, like we do like a lot of modeling, so we can pinpoint this is like the high probability of where the rhinos are. I don't think it's wise to say where they are like to public. If it's like tiger or elephants, that probably will be good, or like orangutan. We need that for like bigger conservation strategy, like a country level conservation strategy. But for rhino, their number is like very, very low. And I don't think they can benefit from the kind of protections that we have now, the kind of like field protections that we have now. When I first published that paper in 2015, like the situation is pretty much different with what we have now. Like we still believe there's a lot of rhino in BBS and Way Kambas at that time. But we see that the kind of protection that we afford for the species in the wild that might benefit the tigers or elephants might not work that well for these species that are like very, very low, like rhino. So yes, for the population that are very low, like in Way Kambas or Borneo, the only way to save them is like just bring them all to captivity. But for the species that still exist in higher populations, one of them is in looser, in the wider looser landscape, just let them be, let them there.
When asked what she would do if she had the power to change this situation in any way, Wulan said she would erase any public knowledge that a rhino horn has value, as the continued poaching of the species is only pushing it further to extinction.
So if I have all the 6 infinity stone and I have the Thanos gauntlet, I will snap my finger and I will remove everybody's memory that rhino horns actually had some kind of perceived benefit. You know, you don't have to do a behavioral change study, just do it and let people behavior will change. Because that's the most hardest part of conservation, Mike. Not doing the survey, not counting the number of rhinos, but changing people's behavior. Like, when dealing with people, that's where the conservation is mostly failing. Like when dealing with the animals, just let them in the wild, like keep them safe, like let them do their things naturally. And conservation practically like done.
I want to thank Wulan for returning to contribute to this series, and for her past work in conserving and protecting the Sumatran rhino. Mongabay Explores is an ongoing podcast series diving into environmental stories from around the globe. Be sure to check out the previous episode in this series, which covers the Sumatran orangutan and their survival in the Batang Toru and Loser ecosystems. If you enjoyed this show, please tell a friend. That's the best way to help expand our reach and keep growing. Watch for a new edition of Mongabay Explores every 2 weeks, in between episodes of our flagship podcast, the Mongabay Newscast, which you can subscribe to wherever you find podcasts, or download our new app for Apple and Android devices to gain fingertip access to all our new shows and all our previous episodes. Special projects like this are made possible by our Patreon supporters, so please consider becoming a monthly sponsor via our Patreon page at patreon.com/Mongabay. Once again, that is patreon.com/Mongabay. Just $1 per month will really help us offset the production costs and hosting fees. And keep up with all of Mongabay's news from Nature's Frontline at mongabay.com mongabay.com or get updates via Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, where our handle is @Mongabay. Thank you once again, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Mongabay Explores.